to another episode of Managing Well. I'm your host, Tonya Ladipo, and I'm excited to continue our conversation. This is part 2 of a 4-part series on relationships at work and talking to Elizabeth Byrne. And today we're really talking about what to do when conflict happens, because if there is one thing we can guarantee in the workplace and in life is that it doesn't matter how great the relationship is, at some point there will be conflict. And so what can we do as people managers to be best prepared for it and deal with it? And so I'm curious, Elizabeth, you said something earlier when we were talking about the importance of anticipating conflict, right? So we might be surprised about what the conflict is, but we shouldn't be surprised that there's conflict because that's just part of relationships, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, what popped into my head is like, to your point, we don't necessarily know what the conflict itself is going to be, but we do need to have a sense of how do I handle conflict? How do I show up in conflict? How does it impact me? Like, what are the things that get stirred up for me? It made me think about, like, for folks that know how to drive, right? Like, I might not know the path or my route, but I know how I sit and how I hold the wheel and how I, steer and shift gears and whatnot, and all the different components of driving. Like, we need to think about it in that way for ourselves with conflict, not just like, oh, well, I'm a kind person, it'll be fine. Like, no, it's not. Like, because conflict stirs up all kinds of unresolved old stuff. And then we just inadvertently bring it in. It's not on purpose, it's not malicious, but people will bring up their wounded parts into conflict situations.
So I want to pause before I ask something, because as you're talking, and you're talking about wounded parts. So I just want to remind the listeners that Elizabeth is a licensed professional counselor, therapist by training, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training. So in these conversations, I want people to understand, like, that's part of the lens that we're bringing to this, which I think is actually really useful, because it's not just the how do I deal with this conflict at work, but I want you to say more about when conflicts at work happen. Say more about what you just said about how it brings up woundedness in us.
Yeah, that's an important call out. Thank you. I think, there's that image of an iceberg, right? Like, that often gets used. So to think about, like, whatever the conflict is in the office, that's the piece on top that you can see, but how we respond, that's everything underneath. That is a culmination of our experience with conflicts our entire life. And so if it was pretty difficult, if conflicts led to danger or trauma, then conflicts can be seen as being high risk, having a lot of weight on them. And it's not just, could you please, refill the coffee pot when you finish it in the office? Like, it's not just that big, simple kind of redirect, like sharing an expectation or a want. It can be like, I can't say anything. Like, what if they get really upset with me? What if I make a mistake and then they're going to do something to me or call me out? And like, people go through all kinds of different thinking that has often not a lot to do with what's actually happening in the present moment. So thinking about, like, what happened when, like, what was people's experiences when they got in trouble as a kid, like, what were punishments like? Was there teachable moments? Like, if you made a mistake, how were you held accountable? Was it in kindness? Was it in, like, strictness or with fear? What was the, like, sentiment that was left behind after that experience? That really impacts how we handle ourselves as adults in the workplace. When somebody says, Tonya, at the end of this meeting, could you please come see me in my office? I need to speak to you. Are you like, cool, great, I wonder what Elizabeth has to say? Or are you like, like, I'm going to get fired. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm in trouble. I'm going to get fired. They're going to call me names. They're going to dock my pay, right? It's going to be punitive. It's going to be harmful. It's going to impact my sense of self and how I'll be treated, right? If those are all the fears going through my mind based on I was starting to say childhood, but past experiences.
Yes.
So like childhood on up to yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Which, you know, is why it takes people some time to settle in when they're actually in a good place. You know,
Sure.
where it is a healthy relationship, it takes a while for folks to put their defenses down, which is true anywhere. We see that in homes, we see that in romantic settings, we see that in friendship groups. You know, like, relationships are relationships. It's just, there's slight differences, but how we show up as humans is pretty consistent.
Pretty consistent and pretty consistently impacted by our past experiences, right?
Right. We like to think that things are so compartmentalized, but they are not. Like, that is such a fantasy.
Yes.
Like,
and you know what? You could be 35 and your manager says, I'd like to see you after this meeting. And your stomach clenches automatically, right? Even if you have a great relationship with your manager, they've never called you out of your name, they've never docked your pay, right? Like, so the fear kind of becomes automatic, even if you don't have that interaction with the person in front of you, but you've had it before.
And so when we're on the receiving end of that and having that activated response, our job is to pause and check in, like, okay, I'm having this response. Does this actually make sense given what I know about this person, given what I know about what they're likely needing to say? Like, you might be calling me into your office to talk about a surprise party for our colleague, you know, like,
right.
It could be anything. So, you know, there's the, if I'm on the receiving end, kind of fact checking myself. And then if I am the person that is saying something, like, you know, to be mindful that my words have impact, you know, and what that could be, and that it's not the other person's fault if they get activated, right? And not in, like, it's their responsibility to manage themselves. But like, if I say, can you see me after this meeting, and I see your demeanor change, then that, what I've seen is people can sometimes be really dismissive of, you know, why are you always expecting the worst, right? Like, that's not managing well. You know, but being a bit more responsive with care of, like, don't worry, it's fine. Right. You know, like, being able to read you, like, which comes back to making a point of knowing our team, you know, so that I can sense that sort of shift. And we're not going to catch everything, but like, there's different ways that you can then learn who is more, you know, everybody knows who on their team is always catastrophizing everything. It doesn't take long to pick those folks out. And so maybe they get a little bit more tender care, or a different way that we talk to them to try to also reduce the risk of conflict. Because if I'm talking to you in the same way, knowing that's going to activate you, there becomes a point of a bit of emotional manipulation there, of like, I'm playing with you in a really unkind way. If I know better, I got to do better. Right.
And you know what you said before when we were talking in preparation, the idea that us as humans, especially I think when we're in management roles, we can get, we have our own frustrations, right? And so the idea of like, why do I have to change? Like, I need this, I need to say this. Why do I have to change it for this particular person? And I just say it like I say it to everybody else. And can't they just do what they need to do so we can move on? And so I think the point of that is you certainly could. And the increased conflict and ripple effect that happens as a result, you sometimes have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Right. Like,
Right.
wouldn't it be easier ultimately to be frustrated and annoyed and take a breath and remember, you know what, actually, if I notice the person's reaction and I speak to it and say, Elizabeth, I know it seemed like you just shut down when I said I wanted to talk to you after the meeting. It's just a conversation, will be okay. If I just give that extra little bit, next conversation is actually going to be easier. And so
Yep.
I think the point of like sometimes taking extra care and adjusting to meet people can be a good thing. You still have to have the conversation, but how you do it might need to shift.
Mm-hmm. And what also popped into my head when you were saying that is like, I'm going to actually show up. I'm not going to like drag my feet, accidentally forget, let someone else's issue take priority. And like, Tonya, I don't know, like John needed a lot of help with this thing. I'm sorry I missed you. Maybe we can catch up tomorrow. Bye. Right. Like there's a less likelihood of passive aggressive responses, and instead people will be more likely to follow through because again, part of what we're doing then is strengthening the sense of safety, being responsive to each other, which has such a huge impact, like
What? Tell me, what's the impact?
well, I mean, when people feel safe and secure, right, like at least within reason, like, and I know like it's not the kind of thing, like nobody's job is promised past today, right, like or even today, like there's all kinds of things that are like floating out there, but if I can at the end of the day know that you're always going to treat me with respect, that's going to have such a huge impact in how I show up for our conversations, in how the attitude and the skill that I bring to my work, the level of attention that I bring to things. Like it just has an impact. And people like to think like, well, you should be doing your best all the time anyways. Okay. Who does that?
Right.
Like we can hold on to that argument, but
well, and also I think the best I'm doing today might be different than what I can do tomorrow, depending on what's going on in my life, right? But what it's going to look like to the other person, it might look like a level work to a C level work, right? Yeah, that we can't always be at 100% in reality. You said something earlier that I wanted to come back to about not being passive aggressive and not avoiding what needs to be discussed. So not avoiding the conflict, and the conflict could happen for so many reasons, right? Somebody's feelings are, somebody feels unseen, unheard, like they don't belong, they feel dismissed, they feel attacked, right? So that could be a conflict. They feel like their work is being overlooked. They feel like they're being passed over for promotion. Like there's a lot of different ways that conflict can arise. And in the moment, I think it can feel safer and easier to like not deal with it, right? And one of the reasons I think that is because of the stories that we as people managers tell ourselves internally about conflict. And so I'm just curious. So if the story I tell myself, I'll use myself as an example. If I see conflict happening in the organization and my automatic story is everybody's really unhappy, it's my job to make everybody feel comfortable and secure and safe, I might miss the opportunity to address the conflict that happened. If I'm tending to how people are feeling, that's great. But then I'm missing the piece of, okay, but something still needed to be changed. There's some behavior that still needed to be adjusted. And so I'm just kind of curious your thoughts as people managers and people who are listening. How do we witness conflict? And then when it's our responsibility to address it, how do we not let our own stuff get in the way so that we actually can't address it?
Therapy. um, I think, when I was listening to you, one of the things that I was thinking about is that so many people view conflict negatively, that it's something to be avoided, that because it's uncomfortable. And if we think about, if we reframe it just as like, it's opportunity for a change, like it's a mark for a difference. It's something to be curious about. Like, it doesn't have to be this scary thing. It doesn't have to be so escalated. Often conflicts is like something's not connecting, like there's a flaw in the code. Like, let's just go find it and fix it, like let's address it, maybe I should say, because fixing isn't necessarily always the solution. That was sort of one of the things I was thinking about, is thinking about, like, in management, what's my attitude that I'm bringing towards a conflict situation, whether it's between members of the team, between teams, it often seems to be pretty interpersonally related, right, which means that we're then tackling everybody else's, iceberg under the water. That's all in play, like, so being able to, from a management perspective, have a more of a bird's eye view and think about, like, how are we all going to move forward as a team, as an organization, like as a unit, like what are some of the things that need to happen? And sometimes that means having hard conversations, about, like, the way that you're showing up on the team is unsatisfactory in these specific ways. And being really explicit about the specifics of having examples. Like, a lot of times, part of what makes conflict escalate is that people have a complaint, but they don't actually have an example to back that complaint up, or not even to back it up, but more of like
explain it.
Yeah, to like demonstrate what the complaint is. Like, if I'm saying, like, well, you're not really being a team player, but I can't tell you how, like, where is this conversation going to go? What do you have left to say other than, okay, thanks for letting me know, I'll do better next time?
Right. But better at what?
Exactly. Like, and so then we just had like a waste of time conversation where you don't know what is actually needing to change. And I'm like, well, now I'm going to hold you accountable because you said you're going to do better next time. Like, I'm not doing a good job as a manager. Like, I need to be able to be specific. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about, so I'm bringing outside relationships and that into this conversation. So I'm thinking about, like, when there is a complaint, when something isn't working well in a relationship, to be able to think about, well, what exactly is it that I want? I can say I don't like how I'm being treated, but, like, what specifically do I want? Do I want a text once a day? Do I want our families to spend time together? Like, what is the concrete thing that is desired, right? And so we so often in the workplace talk about giving concrete, actionable feedback. It's the same thing in other relationships. And so, and it's the same, I would say it's the same muscle that many of us, I'll include myself, many of us can use more practice in, right? And so when there is conflict, when there is feedback, as a manager, whether you're the one giving it or hearing it, how are you doing so in a way that is really concrete? So, for example, if I'm saying, Elizabeth, when I say you're not much of a team player, what I have noticed is that when I give an assignment to the entire team, you tend to take it and do all of it, and you don't consult with everybody else. And that's not working for us, because everybody here is incredible and we need everybody's input. Like, that is a concrete example of not being a team player, right? that behavior then can then change. So next time I give you an assignment, I want to make sure that you are talking to everybody on that project and that you don't make decisions without input from everybody. So you should be meeting with them at least once a week for the duration of this project. That's concrete, right? Not just letting it go, not just hearing whispers of concern and just letting them whisper, which for people managers, if they're whispering and it gets to you, it means it's being yelled at when you're not around.
Loud. It is loud.
Yeah. You know, I'm curious, Elizabeth, what are some what are your suggestions of the best way to navigate and manage workplace relationships and conflicts? And one of the reasons I'm excited, like talking about relationships with you, is you have such a curious perspective. I don't find you to be defensive in ways that I certainly can be. And in ways I think I've said this before, we were co-facilitating a session and we were talking about feedback and you're just talking about, oh yes, this is a wonderful gift yet. And I'm like, gift, it's like going to the dentist. Who likes feedback? But you have to still do it. But your openness to like, you really want to kind of know and like work with the conflict and improve it. And so I'm really curious from your perspective, what would you recommend for managers to be able to address conflict most effectively?
Well, thank you. And like, I think when I think about times that I've been managing a team and had to handle conflict, or have a difficult conversation with somebody because of conflict that they're participating in on the team, for me, I have to check in with myself of, am I seeing this person as the problem? Or am I separating the problem from the person? And so that one thing has such a huge influence on how my patience level, how I'm talking to them, the solutions that I'm seeking, whether or not I'm coming in with solutions that I just want them to like agree to, or which PS doesn't work, or if I am open to coming together, like figuring this out with them. So like, you know, in couples therapy, right? A lot of times we talk about, okay, let's put the problem on the other side of the table. The two of you have to sit on this side together, right? Like, well, that's no different in any other relationship. We do that. We could do that in the workplace so the issue is whatever it is, like, let's put that on that side of the table, even if it is, you know, the way that you are speaking to, like, you know, I guess, what's an example I can think of quickly? Like, being in a team meeting and anytime somebody shares an idea, if it's from someone that the person isn't friends with, they're like, all right. And just a little subtle, dismissive, like not encouraging kind of response. Putting that behavior on that side, like, okay, so you and I, we're on over here and we got to figure out like the kind of response, like, what do we need to do about that? What's behind that? What's prompting that? What's whatever, you know, and it might be like, well, that person doesn't have good ideas, in my opinion. Okay. Can we practice a plain face and a quiet mouth? Like, maybe that's the solution.
Right. You know, and that's actually a really good point. I always, you know, I often say for the workplace, like, you can't tell people what to think and feel, but you can legislate how they behave, right? And so stop rolling your eyes, fix what you need to do.
Fix your face.
Fix your face, nod your head, smile. Doesn't matter, whatever's going on in here, keep going on in there, right?
Right.
But to make the workplace a good space for everybody, behaviors have to change.
Yeah. And the other thing I think about is like, what's the purpose? Like, what am I trying to accomplish right now? Because when things get escalated, solving the conflict is not usually still like the goal. What ends up being the goal is like, oh no, you're gonna listen to me, or oh no, like, you're gonna agree with me, right? Like, whatever it is, like, we're not showing up as our best selves, and people don't realize when they're getting activated, like, and by people, I'm including myself, because, like, we're all like, this happens to all of us.
Mhm.
When we're in an activated space, we're not thinking and coming from that, logical or team oriented space. We're having all of that underneath the surface iceberg activated. All those previous experiences are getting stirred up, and it's like there's all kinds of just unconscious things that are happening.
Yes. Yes. And I'm thinking of a recent example for me. And to your point about accountability, and I think also when you have a trusting relationship, other people holding you accountable. I I was recently told something, and I just went to 60, like 0 to 60 in a hot second. I was so angry. And I made a quick answer, and then I was like, let me pause on that. And I said, I'm really angry. Let me pause on giving an answer. Wait, actually, I gave a quick answer, ended the meeting, sent an email, and said, you know what? Please don't take action on that. I was really angry. I need to think about it. And thankfully, the person responded, I wasn't going to take action, as you said, because I could tell you were upset. Whew. Thankful.
Yes.
Thankful. Right? Because had they done what I asked them to do, which is funny, and then I want to say, and then days later, after not being so angry and like thinking through what I think the best course of action was, it was actually the same answer, right? But it wasn't an answer out of anger. It was an answer out of protocol and process.
Mm-hmm.
So I can stand behind it. So, you know what I mean? But the relationship,
yes,
somebody else to see me, before I could see myself, to help me manage that more effectively.
I mean, that is such a great example of someone setting you up for success.
Yes.
Knowing like, oh, this is not how you would normally respond.
Yes.
And when you said about them seeing you before you saw yourself, like, I feel like that's such a great example of when we're activated. When we're activated, we're not actually seeing ourselves, right? Like, but if we have built relationships and trust with others, people are able to see that and then maybe wait, and give. And it's important for us to get that feedback later. And there's that moment of self-reflection, those opportunities of like, oh, okay, what got kicked off for me here? And like whatever it is that I need to do to like have an opportunity to be a bit more intentional the next time, right? Like, and
yes.
Where I see and where I've experienced managers not doing that piece of the kind of post-mortem, right, if you will, like it's like, well, but you did that thing, that's why I got upset like that. Like, if you hadn't, like, the problem here is you did the thing, and like that's why I got upset about that and did whatever. And that's, we can't end one, that's not true, because people do things all the time, and how we are feeling on any given day has such a huge impact of how we respond to the exact same thing. True. And we have to do those follow-up steps of figuring out what is it that I like, what happened here, right? Like,
yeah, no, very true. And I actually realized pretty quickly what happened there. I understood why I was so upset by it. But that process, but I had to go through that process, right? And when I say hold it, because it's also because the person who didn't take the action, they like, I'm their boss. So that
was a risk.
that was a risk, and frankly not their job to do. Right. And so for me, and I'm obviously not going to get it right every time, but to be thoughtful of like, okay, so how do I pause myself so I don't put them in the position where they have to manage me? Right.
Oh, whew, that's a whole conversation in and of itself.
Managing up. Listen,
yes,
we have all done it. And I think the more advanced you get in your career, you sometimes don't realize when people are doing it to you. But they are.
Yeah, that is a really I think, I mean, that falls into the conflict piece as well, right? Like, and I think about too how many times in families children do that to their parents, where they have to manage up
so that they can be safe, whether it's physically safe or emotionally safe.
Right. Like,
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, we've talked about how when we're in positions of management, thinking about things in terms of like, we make the weather, right? Or we influence the weather. And I think that can be seen as like unrealistic power, kind of piece of it. But I think what I mean by it isn't that, it's more acknowledging the intensity of the influence that we have on so many things, on our teams, on our directs, on our peers, like, and in terms of managing up, like the ways that we are showing up, the more metered we are, the more measured, it just has such a huge impact and ripple effect. When I mean, what it makes me think about is co-regulation, like, so in terms of nervous system activation, like something happens and I'm no longer in a calm space, like, am I the type of manager who's able to co-regulate and help people kind of bring themselves back down into a calm space? Or am I like just throwing lighter fluid on the fire, and making it worse?
Yes.
And then complaining that nothing got done today.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's we keep talking about emotional intelligence because that's the part of like knowing yourself, right? Knowing what is your, I don't know if I want to say natural, but what is your kind of most common response, right? And then knowing how that response impacts those around you.
Yep. And to your point earlier about the relationships everywhere, how everything is connected, people might be able to bring like a very kind of grounded self to work, but if I am losing it at home or with friends, like that, our true self is showing up somewhere, like in terms of like where our work is to be done. And the more that we can lean into acknowledging all the interconnectedness for our own selves, we can have a more accurate read of where is my work that needs to happen. Like, am I able to keep it together at work, but then I come home and I lose it? Like, well, if that's the case, then there's a lot I got to do and practice it at work, because.
And I was just gonna say, also knowing that if you can do it in one area, but you're struggling in another, it means that you have the skills to do it, right? You're not starting from zero.
Right. But maybe it's an opportunity to deepen deepen that skill set and strengthen it.
Yes.
Because like, if we're talking about emotions, am I actually working through them and releasing them appropriately, or am I just shoving them down and then it's a volcano effect at the end of the day?
Right. At the end of the day on your team at work, or the end of the day at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I am going to use the word beauty, because beauty's not always pretty. Beauty is like messy and sticky, and beauty, like, it's all of it. I think that's the beauty of like managing in the workplace, is it's an opportunity to develop so many skills within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I think while we're hired for the job to push the project forward,
Mm-hmm.
that's the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah.
And then the rest of management is all of the things that are unseen, that are messy and sticky and fun and, wondrous. It's all the things. And I think it could just constantly cause us to practice, right?
Yeah.
Practice it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the focus so often is on the job itself and those responsibilities. But when we are in a position of management, there's really the opportunity for healing, which I get that, like, a lot of people don't think like that, but, it's true. Like, to be able to offer corrective experiences.
Yes.
And the impact that can have, because that person that's now your direct, there's a high likelihood that at some point in their career, they are going to be managing as well.
Yes.
And so what are they taking away? They might be walking around with what they don't want to do, but if they haven't had the experience of what to do instead, that hasn't been flushed out, and it's not so clear for them to put into place. So there's just lots of opportunities, I think, for us to, pay it forward, I guess, in that sort of way. Like, I know that gets overused, but, just the healing is really that's the word that I like. But I get it that a lot of people might eye roll at that, but I think that it is really so possible.
No, I think that's a perfect kind of endpoint. Like, that's an ultimate goal, right? And so I think for people management, when we're thinking about conflict, the kind of the 3 points that come to mind, the idea as a people manager that expect it, because conflict will happen, right? And then kind of, what's the story that you're telling yourself about conflict that you might need to sort through and kind of pick apart, so that you can actually be more effective in dealing with conflict with your team. And then to your point, like, how can you be a corrective experience, to use Elizabeth's word, healing experience, so that conflict is dealt with in a way that changes the behavior, doesn't shame the person, and the incredibly powerful ripple effect that has on other people as a model for how to be a great people manager. But I also want to say, as a leader, because you might not manage people in the workplace, but in other parts of your life, you'll be a leader. And to see, like, oh, I saw them do that, I might try this differently in my personal life. And so the ripple effect, I think, is significant. So Elizabeth, thank you for another really interesting conversation. I really love being able to talk about just how we work at work and the influence of relationships to that, and what we've learned outside of work, and then what we need to do to be a better people manager. So thank you.
Thank you. It's always such a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you for listening to Managing Well. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to learn more about today's episode, go to theladipogroup.com/podcast for a worksheet on today's episode. A special thanks to my podcast team and the Ladipo Group, who supports this show. Managing Well is produced and edited by Black Faves Brand Studio. I'm your host, Tonya Ladipo. If you have any questions or topics you want to discuss, email me at managingwellpodcast@theladipogroup.com.